Hello and welcome to Joining the Dots and Managing Your Mantras. My name's Graham Wales, and over the course of the next few minutes I'm going to talk through some of the models that I've used over the years of my life in safety to try and get results for both employers and for clients that I've worked with. A little bit about me. I started my working life 38 years ago with a company called ICI. After 11 years with those, I had 11 years with DuPont. Then a couple of years in the consulting business, largely in aviation, before an interesting time with Cadbury Schweppes, followed by a corporate role with Aggregate Industries before moving out to Switzerland to work with their group company on a global basis. And in that time, you'll be pleased to know I've had lots of different roles, taken the appropriate qualifications, so I've done my 10,000 hours. So hopefully you'll be reassured that I actually do know a little bit about what I'm talking about. And all I've really had to do in that time to make a success of many aspects of safety is a bit like Forrest on the bench, really, thinking about the people that I've worked with, people that I've had great mentors over the years that have taught me a lot, had the opportunity to apply some of that, and in later life teach other people a little bit about it as well. If we think about joining the dots, so I think, there's lots of stuff in safety which is traditional, lots of stuff which is new, but I always think that you only really need to master three things in terms of safety. One is to be able to understand the things that have happened. Two is to recognise the things that are happening, and hopefully to influence the things that we need to happen going forward. So if I think about this in context of behaviours, lots of people talk to me about how do we influence and improve behaviours. I'm going to take you through some models that I've worked with over the years. So as a bit of an introduction, a simple view of how injuries occur. We have tasks that have to be performed, we bring people to perform those tasks, and occasionally during this interaction people suffer an incident or an injury. That's certainly what I felt about safety when I first started work. The minor injuries that I suffered were wholly consistent with the tasks I was performing. But as I started to get a bit more involved in safety and started to get invited onto investigations and projects to look at improvement, one of the things that did become quite a mind-boggler for me was, well, if the injuries are directly related to the nature of the task, why is it that companies that perform similar tasks can end up with very different results? And perhaps more importantly for me, how could I use learning about that to make the company that I was working for continue doing similar tasks but perhaps change its results? So to perhaps explain this a bit more, I'm going to use a case study. So there's a case study from the industrial nylon business in the UK. The first target company I'm going to compare and contrast with is the ICI Fibres plant in the north of England. The second one would be the DuPont nylon factory in Doncaster in the north of England. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you will spot straight away that is actually the same factory, and it is. And that makes it a very good model for a study of this nature, because what we're going to do is look at this period of time on transition to see if we can compare and contrast how people changed. So if we have a look here, what you can see is the factory operating under ICI. So you can see the extrusion floor, it's a hot environment. You can see there the waste yarn that has to be picked up. You can see a bit of infrastructure damage. It's a bit dark and dingy, but otherwise it's generally clean. What you can't see so clearly is how warm and humid it is. But what you can see there is the chap's got his own cotton t-shirt and his own joggy bottoms for comfort. You can see trailing cables from the roof, and they're for inspection lamps. You can see on the right hand side a bit of infrastructure damage. So it's seen a bit of action, this plant. It was the oldest nylon plant in Europe, the second oldest in the world. So it's been about a bit. What we're now going to look at is the same plant under DuPont. So this is the same area. What you can see is it's a little bit brighter. You can see the same industrial process. So you're seeing the same soft waste that's being generated. But there's no trailing cables anymore. What you see here is the employee is trusted to have his own equipment, his own torch. What you can also see is whilst you have a choice of workwear, there is an expectation that you'll wear workwear. So equipment's provided. You can see it's a brighter, cleaner environment. What you can also see from the DuPont video of the day is that DuPont were much more comfortable at showing people working in some of the more high hazard processes. So things like the pack change, high temperature, quite a hazardous operation really when you think about it. You can see there the extensive PPE that the guys are wearing. So all in all, you can see a slightly different operation. So same products, same processes, same equipment and same people, but a different injury experience. So let's see how we can use the models of safety to explain this. So around that time I was studying my NEBOSH certificate and I was being introduced to HSG 65, Successful Health and Safety Management. And what that did was introduce me to the impact of the overriding organisation. So around the individuals and the task there is an organisation that affects that local safety culture. So how individuals are inducted, supervised, trained, set to work affect the choices that they make when they're undertaking their task, and how the workplace is maintained physically and how group behaviours led and supervised by managers either challenges or reinforces those choices. So when I was learning things like the Swiss cheese model, doing my NEBOSH certificate, what it started to feel like that rather than just individual lines of defence, if you took all those component features and put them together to one cohesive and comprehensive organisation, that would have an impact on the choices that we made as individuals and affect the safety performance. Another model I was introduced to at the time, not from the world of safety, was the Rogers diffusion curve. So first published in 1962, it came out of the world of sales, and it basically worked on the premise of that some people were innovators, early adopters, right down to laggards at the other end. And of course the key challenge in safety is to move people along the more progressive end of the curve, because you can't just write the laggards off and hope that they don't have an injury. And the challenge that we have is to actually move the whole of our population. And to give you some practical example of what this meant in practice, what you're seeing there is a still photograph of a wrap on a spinning machine. Now, in the period of time that I worked for ICI, I would say that a reasonably common injury was somebody might lose the tip of a finger. Sometimes they'd lose a bit more of a finger down to the knuckle, but a dangerous activity. Now the procedure said that you should hit the stop button. Now if you do that on one of those machines, if you remember the soft waste that the guy was handling upstairs, that whole alleyway would fill with soft waste within a matter of minutes. So turning the machine off was very much not a bet to nothing. It would not be a popular thing to do, and in reality people would turn a blind eye and they would remove the wrap from the running machine. Now in the DuPont experience, again, they involved the workforce, so they realised that just turning the machine off probably was going to be a rule enforcement that would be difficult and unpopular, and it would be required policing rather than leading. So what we did was work with some of those innovators, the early adopters, and give them some scope to design their own piece of equipment, which meant that they could actually remove the wrap by cutting into a gun locally, leaving the machine running, but they could remove the wrap without getting their fingers into the place of danger. So a simple example that was sort of reinforced how using this model helped us get a different injury experience. So same products, same processes, same equipment and people, but we ended up with a very different injury experience. Let's have a look at this model again with a case study, something a bit more up to date, a bit more modern. So our organisation this time is a large hospital. The task, we're going to publicly recognise and thank our healthcare workers for their exemplary efforts in the midst of a pandemic. Reasonable thing to do. So for that we need a VIP. So let's see how we did this. The organisation we're going to look at is the Mayo Clinic, one of the biggest, most prominent hospitals in North America, and the VIP is actually a VP. So we're going to use the Vice President, and let's see how it went.
Here is your vice president, who today was the only one at the Mayo Clinic seen not wearing a mask, touring COVID wards and testing facilities at a huge hospital, no mask. A short flight away from returning to the White House to come in contact with the most senior members of our government, no mask. Earlier today, the clinic posted that it has, quote, informed the vice president of the masking policy prior to his arrival today. That post was since taken down. Then came a statement that the masking policy had been shared with Pence's office. Note that the CDC issued guidelines recommending masks earlier this month. Also, please note Pence is the head of the coronavirus task force.
Okay, so what we saw there was the Mayo Clinic did all their bit of their organisation correctly. They briefed the right person. They made sure the right equipment was available. They got everybody else in there. Yet still it went wrong. Now that chimes with some aspects of what I've seen over the years with different organisations that I've worked with in industry. So how could this gone so badly wrong? So let's have a look at what happened 3 weeks before.
CDC is advising the use of non-medical cloth face covering as an additional voluntary public health measure. So it's voluntary, you don't have to do it. They suggest it for a period of time, but this is voluntary. I don't think I'm going to be doing it.
Okay, so that's Donald Trump, Mike Pence's boss. And what this addition to the HSG 65 model gives me, and what I've seen as well in industry, is our strategic leadership level can bring significant influence. They don't necessarily need to send an email saying, don't you wear a mask, it'll make me look stupid. But the implied values and behaviours that are expected can have a massive impact on our local management organisation and the people that work for us. Because if we think about the diffusion curve, the same's true for our local management. And we used to laugh and joke that if you got the supervisor's job, they changed the chip in the back of your neck. It wasn't actually true, but our local managers still have these slight differentials. They're not one homogeneous body. So it's important to realise that impact of that outer curve, that outer circle on the local management organisation. Now if we bring those two models together, what I end up with is something that looks a bit like this. So now we see our local organisation and our individuals working together, enveloping the task, both with the support of that strategic leadership level, because that's where I've seen it work best. So this idea will work far better in my experience than either a top-down or a bottom-up. So we have the tasks of strategic leadership, setting the direction, allocating the resources, monitoring the impact. Our local management have to interpret that message, tangibly leading that direction, utilising resources so that the operations have something to align under and their behaviour can reinforce that. But where there's a problem, they then need to be able to give feedback. And the challenging bit, and having been a first-line manager in industry, the local management, it felt like I was at the centre of the hourglass. So we'll perhaps talk about the hourglass on a different episode. But this idea of, in the centre of the hourglass, we have to regulate the task and make sure it's successful, meeting the pressures from above and regulating the output so that people below can operate effectively. So the summary points for the behavioural interventions: everybody's behaviour contributes to the whole. The actions and reactions are affected by those relationships of those different roles. So we need complementary interventions for different roles, making the best overall results.